And we have Ken Lemieux. Jeff is going to start first, and then Ken will be the closer. So, and afterwards they'll answer questions. They have a book. Jeff has a book that he wrote for sale for $24.95. He takes
Cash, check, Visa, credit card.
There's also a jar there. If you are inclined to make a donation to the foundation, you can do so. So let's get started.
Okay. Thank you, Lorraine. So as Lorraine said, I'm Jeff Holden. I'm the president of the Wolf Moose Foundation. And just real quickly separate the foundation from the project. We're basically going to be talking about the project, that is the scientists and the work the scientists do. There's something now called the foundation. It's a nonprofit that's trying to raise funds to support the project because funding from the federal level is getting a little tougher to come by. So the foundation's been around for about 2 years. We're ramping up our efforts on fundraising. I have the tip jar there. And also, if you'd like to sign up, you can sign up. There's a sign-up sheet there for getting our emails, our newsletters, etc. But of course, as soon as you sign up, in addition to the newsletters, we're going to ask you for money. But basically, it's for a good cause. It's for the project. The project's been going on for 67 years, since 1958. World's longest running predator prey study. And it wants to keep going. It keeps learning new things year after year. And it's one of those kind of landmark studies that really does underscore why watching the natural world continuously year after year and not just little 3 and 5 year chunks is valuable. So I'm going to probably talk for about 15, 20 minutes, hand it over to Ken. If you have questions, you can't understand something I said or I'm speaking too quickly, let me know. Otherwise, we will do a Q&A at the end. Any questions before I get going here? Okay, I'm going to do kind of a high-level overview of the project, and then Ken's got some nice, meaty, gritty sort of experiences. And we're both coming at this from the volunteer standpoint, citizen scientists. And I'm going to start off basically, and I think a lot of this stuff you probably already know, because I know Ken has talked to you previously. But some Isle Royale basics. It's in the middle of Lake Superior. It's a pretty good size island, about 45 by 9. It's been a national park for starting to get close to a century here. No permanent residents. It's basically 99% plus wilderness, and whatever nature wants to do, it can do. Lots of trails, and it's one of the least visited national parks, but it's also the national park that gets the most repeat visitors. And even though I chose this, I like this particular picture. It's got a mosquito on it. I picked this, and after I put it in and sent it to Ken, I thought, oh my God, there's a mosquito in the photo. But it's still a gorgeous picture. Okay, in case you aren't good with geography, I've got it circled. Isle Royale's up in the middle of Lake Superior. And it's a really good place for doing this kind of research. And the reason it's really good for doing this kind of research, it's a simplified environment. It's far enough away from Canada and Minnesota over there onto the west. It's a good 15 miles to the nearest part of the mainland. So consequently, there's simplified environment. There's only about 1/3 as many mammals on the island as there is on the surrounding mainland around it. Also, there's very few animals that come and go to the island. There's not much immigration, emigration. And the scientists like this because anytime they see some sort of change, they can probably attribute it to the population that's been on the island. Simplified environments mean simplified dynamics. More simple. Doesn't necessarily mean it's totally simple. And the 205 square miles for the island is a good size. It's big enough where animals can do their thing, be animals. But it's not so big that a bunch of people can come onto the island and periodically tromp around off trail and go find things. So basically, since 1988, volunteers have been coming to the island year after year, hiking off trail, looking for dead moose. Okay, before 1940, just give you a little bit more background on Isle Royale. So Isle Royale, like most places, is not just sort of, I don't know, in amber. It doesn't, it's not a, never, it's a changing spot. So prior to 1940, I don't know, as Americans got up there, we basically did what we do to a lot of natural environments. We basically tried to do a lot of resource extraction. So from the middle of the 1800s, there was an awful lot of mining going on, and the Native Americans originally mined on the island, and they got very pure copper out of it. So consequently, Americans, mining concerns, thought we can probably come in here and also do some kind of mining. About the same time, the middle of the 1800s, they started doing commercial fishing. And almost all of this activity took right at the edge of the perimeter of the island. And this is kind of a typical looking fishery at Chippewa Harbor, which is a pretty little harbor. But I also like this one because an awful lot of the background there, you can tell at some point it probably had been logged and it was just starting to grow back. Click.
That's correct. Go back. It's I get double done.
You went 2 slides.
It's the same picture, but
Oh.
I located it.
Oh,
It was running into the other page. So
oh, okay. So you did an edit here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was thinking there wasn't enough words on that page. Okay. Excuse my confusion. Also, there was, so a lot of Isle Royale was also logged. The center of the island, you'll still find some, basically some, pure pristine trees that were not cut down in the late 1800s. And then in the late 1890s, tourism started creeping in. Three of the different fishing concerns realized we're not making a whole lot of money here, but we got all these buildings, let's call it a hotel. So they started doing tourism sort of things going on, and that kind of grew up through the 1920s. By the time you got to 1930, you had the Depression, and people were starting to talk about maybe making it a national park.
here, I can do it with this.
Oh,
Just look at me when you want me to.
give you the high sign, or I'll have to learn how to do that. So basically around 1930, 1940, there was some talk about making the island into a national park. The first part of the 20th century, there weren't wolves on the island. So wolves are relatively recent to the island. There used to be lynx and caribou, and they were on the island to the 20s and 30s. And lynx and caribou, like a lot of animals, once humans got done doing the trapping, hunting, logging, mining, etc., they eventually went away. And then coyotes were also on the island off and on. In terms of the other large mammals that are on the island, you got fox, otter, beaver, squirrels, marten, snowshoe hare, and you're down to chipmunks and birds. And the moose that I got there, I like that shot, a couple of reasons. One of the things we do is we are going around, if we can get good pictures of moose like this, a broadside picture. This is a springtime shot, probably late May, early June. And from this picture, the scientists can get a notion of just how much the tick damage is going on. So all of this area that's basically black is bare skin. And then where there's kind of some white, that's more broken fur. This moose really only has good fur up on his snout, really. So he had a pretty bad dose of ticks during the winter. And this is one of the things that the scientists keep track of, is just how bad are the ticks. And there's a lot of different things that impact the tick population, but largely ticks are getting more and more prominent on the island.
That's the next one.
Oh, okay. Lots of moose around the island. So they came over sometime, probably right around 1900. The old stories that they swam across, that's kind of not holding as much water as it used to. Couple of reasons why. One, they didn't think that many could swim across all kind of at the same time and suddenly have 500 moose on the island in 1910. But also they have started doing some DNA analysis, and it looks like the moose on the island are more closely related to northern Minnesota moose than Ontario moose. And there's some word that there was a Duluth hunting club might have brought a whole bunch of moose over in the early 1900s to make Isle Royale kind of a big hunting preserve for themselves. Any event, so around 1900, the moose started coming onto the island, and they grew because they didn't really have any predators for the first 3 decades they were on the island. And in the late 20s, early 30s, There was a number of different scientists, naturalists that came onto the island, and they estimated there was probably about 2,000, so one of them even had up to 5,000 moose on the island, which would be probably impractical or impossible. In any event, there was a lot of moose on the island, and Adolph Murray, who is a well-known natural scientist, made his reputation at the University of Michigan, on Isle Royale, and up in Denali especially. He was on the island in 1929, 1930, and he was closely following the island after that, but he predicted a big collapse. And by 1936, there was a collapse, lots of dead moose all over, and they estimated only about 500 moose were left on the island. Another big thing that happened in the middle 30s is there was a large fire pretty much directly in the middle of the island. Yeah, it's not a very good spot there. This is the island, but it basically took up the middle kind of corridor almost. And the only thing that grew back really are aspen and birch, and those are not favorite moose foods. So as we, the volunteers, go off on the island to look for dead moose, we rarely go into the middle part of the island because moose just don't go there because they don't have anything to eat. Okay, so prior to the study starting in 1958, wolves and basically every other predator in the country, they're all viewed as basically killers and junky sorts of species. And we humans, we did our best to get rid of them all. So through hunting, trapping, poisoning, there was very few wolves left in the contiguous 48 states, mostly up in Canada and Alaska. Common view at the time is that wolves were killing machines. You put them someplace where there's prey species, it won't take them very long just to wipe out the entire prey species. And kind of the same thought was going along with bears, cougars, coyotes. They're just all viewed as destructive predators that are going to go after our cattle, to go after our people. People didn't have a very good view of wolves and other predators. Click. Okay, that's Adolph Murray on the right there. I couldn't find a good picture of Aldo Leopold, but those two were both pretty well-known naturalists in the early part of the 20th century, and they were watching Isle Royale. Everybody was well aware that Isle Royale had a lot of moose and no predators. And this is about the time they started thinking, maybe we ought to have, for a healthy ecosystem, we probably need a predator as well as all the prey. And both Murray and Aldo Leopold, as well as some others, they suggested that maybe wolves should be put on Isle Royale to help control the moose population. And while this discussion was going on, the island became a national park. No one was going to put the wolves on, but the wolves said, we're coming across anyway. So winter of 48, 49, it's pretty icy. There's a nice ice bridge, and quite a few wolves came over to the island at that point. Click. And when it was finally known that there were wolves on Isle Royale, naturalists took notice of this thing. And they thought, this is just a perfect spot to kind of study a predator and a prey in a fairly simplified system. And Durwood Allen, he's the fellow in the upper right, he was a professor at Purdue University. He got a nice grant from the National Science Foundation, hired the L. David Nietzsche, who's the dude kind of squatting by a whole bunch of mostly looks like mandibles, got him to run the program. And basically set him down on the island and said, count the moose, count the wolves, just watch, see what you can learn. And this is also about the time that they started regularly doing flyovers in the wintertime. So trying to get counts of wolves and moose. It'd only been about 15, 20 years that they'd been doing flyovers anyplace. But Nietzsche started that off. And basically, he was just going to kind of stay on the island, and in the wintertime, they did the flyovers. In the summertime, he did a lot of tromping around looking for the dead moose. And after they got done with that first 3 years, they thought, there's so much more to learn here, so they kept getting some more grants, and they kept the study going. Click.
Got it.
Thank you. Rolf Peterson in the upper left, he came onto the project about 1970. And by 74, he was leading the particular project. And Rolf moved it up to Michigan Tech and Houghton Hancock, it being vastly closer to Isle Royale than Purdue University, Indiana is. And that's where it's based out of even today. So Rolf and his wife Candy, they both still have been on the island. They just got off the island about 3 weeks ago, I think, 2 weeks ago. So he's still up on the island, and this is about his 55th year or so on the island. He gave up his professoring duties in 2006, so he's a professor emeritus, still works with Michigan Tech. And John Vucetich, the other fellow up there, he's been co-leading the project since 2000. He's pretty cool. He's, in addition to the Wolf Moose project, he's got a lot of other interests in other predators and their preys. He's a distinguished professor at Michigan Tech. And Sarah Hoy is the new kid on the block. She's been with the project for about 10 years and been co-leading since 2017. She's also a professor, assistant professor at Michigan Tech. And between these three and some of the other scientists that have rotated through Michigan Tech, they've got hundreds of published papers, peer-reviewed papers, and been the focus of a number of books over the years. And that's kind of where the project stands today. Click. And the study is still basically is the way David Meach set it up in 1958. There's a winter study and a summer study. And in the winter study, they fly over the island. And usually they're on the island for about 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the weather and how much data they're getting. And you can see the little plane. It's got skis, not wheels. And they land on Washington Harbor on the west end of the island. And they fly over the island. And what they like to do is they have a certain pattern that they go over the island. They hit certain plots and count the moose. And they push the data that they get from that through a complex statistical algorithm that takes into consideration the number of calves they see, the number of females they see with calves, where they see them, etc. And they come up with an estimate, and like most statistical estimates, it's a number, 850, 95% confidence interval within 120 of that or something. So they do that every winter. Also, as they fly over, they note where the wolves are at. So wolves are much easier to count for three reasons. One, there are fewer of them. Two, wolves are very territorial. So if you see wolves at, say, Rock Harbor on Tuesday, and you fly over on Thursday and you see same bunch of wolves, you can pretty much be sure it's the exact same bunch of wolves or pack of wolves, because they don't go swapping around territory. They're very territorial. Not having a good time saying that. And they also will watch to see where the wolves kill the moose. And in the wintertime, that's pretty easy. There's not as many leaves on the trees. Big moose gets killed. Red blood shows up quite nicely on snow. And they're able to, most winters, pick a pretty good count of the wolves. So the wolf count is probably more of an actual census than it is an estimate. And to also get a little bit more rigor to that, they also get a lot of wolf scat. So one of the things that they will do in the wintertime is they'll land the plane on lakes. If they know that a wolf just defecated, they're going to go get that sample. And I think of it as a poop census. So they can follow, we've seen this DNA from this wolf since 2015. It's 2025. This would be a very old wolf. So they got a nice poop record for most of the wolves on the island. They also know where the wolves have killed moose. And believe it or not, they'll take a GPS and GPS the location from an airplane overhead. And I'm always amazed that it's pretty accurate. Usually within about 30 feet. I don't know what your experience has been.
It's uncanny how close they can get.
So the plane only flies about 30 to 40 miles an hour as it's doing its runs across the island, which I don't like flying anyway, but that would scare me.
That plane that's in that picture, that was the one. This was in the newspaper a few years ago when they had it was the winter that wasn't, and they had to pull out of there. And they mentioned in these articles that plane weighs like 800 pounds, which to me is insanely light.
Yep.
Literally, you could get
it's basically a motorized kite. So it's not big and go slow. And they trust their lives to it. But every year they fly over the island for 6 to 8 weeks. So basically, the wintertime is when they estimate the wolf and moose numbers. And a lot of what they learn sets up what the summer study is going to be. Click. So the summer study is where there's boots on the ground, so to speak. And since 1988, the project's been using citizen scientists. Volunteers come up to the island, and usually in 4 waves every year. And everybody hikes from 7 to 8 days in a row, and we're off trail most of the time, looking for dead moose. And so at the beginning of each week, so each group is going to be 4 to 6 people total with one group leader. And the group leader will talk with Rolf Peterson. Rolf Peterson heads up the study on the island for the volunteers. And he'll give everybody some GPS coordinates and then just sort of suggest, in addition to that, just look in these areas. So we'll look at a map and we'll scope out kind of some areas that Rolf will want us to try go to. And that's basically the big thing that goes on. So every year, like see, this past year, I put the numbers there. Yes, in 2025, there was 74 volunteers and group leaders in 13 groups. And we hiked about 562 miles. A little over half of that was off trail and got 103 new dead moose. And over the years, the project has gotten over 6,000 dead moose on the island, which is about 40% of the moose that probably have ever lived on the island. And from that, they can reconstruct the moose population through the years. And as I was telling a few people who came up to, and you can come up here after we're done talking, we collect bones, and I'm going to move out of here. So we always collect a skull if we can, and mandibles. So this is just the upper part of the skull. There's mandibles for the lower jaw. And we like teeth, and we also collect metatarsus. And in humans, this is a bone in your foot. Moose have repurposed that as another joint in their leg. And then we also get any bones that happen to have some sort of pathology, if it's got arthritis or some sort of breaks. And with the teeth, as I was explaining to a few people, ungulates that have different diets in the summer versus the winter, their teeth get slightly different chemical buildups to help them eat different things. So moose in the wintertime are going to eat woodier sorts of things. So the teeth need to be a little tougher. So if you take their teeth, cut them in half, get a microscope, you can count all those layers of different, it's a Latin term, which I can never remember how to pronounce, but you can count the rings essentially and tell how old they were when they died. So if you know that a moose died in February of 2025, and it was 10 years old when it died, it was born in 2015. And through doing this, they can reconstruct the moose population through the years. And then they're going to correlate that with all other data that they've got, the number of wolves, the age structure of the moose population, the age structure of the wolf population, temperature, snow depth, ticks. I'm sure there's plenty of other things they're keeping track of. Additionally, when we're hiking off trail, we keep track of some other things. We keep track of, for instance, gray jays, snowshoe hares, antler sheds. Sometimes we keep track of data or look for data for other projects that have nothing to do with the Wolf Moose project, because we're a pretty good resource hiking off trail. So we have looked for other data elements in years past. As a group leader, if we find anything that's even vaguely interesting, I write it down and GPS it, because sometimes Rolf is very interested in it, and sometimes he's like, I don't know why you wrote that down. But sometimes he likes it. Let's see, the other part of the summer studies, they do have grad students that come up, or students that come up. Some are graduate students, some are just interns. So this year there was a bunch of students on the island for a number of weeks doing transits across the island, looking at growth in balsam fir and, yes, beaver foraging distance, which Rolf abbreviates as BFD, which I like that. Yep, Rolf has a sense of humor. But those were a couple of things the students were doing this summer. So students come out every year also. And then also they use the Park Service, because the Park Service have a lot of personnel on the island. So the Park Service are good in terms of hearing where there might be a dead moose or a dead wolf, bringing them information. So the Park Service is a really good team member for the project. Click. Okay, some key findings, and these are kind of high level. That notion from the middle of the 20th century that wolves are just kind of insatiable killers, this study, as well as other studies, have basically proven that wolves are not killing machines. Wolves are pretty particular about who they're going to attack. Moose are 600 to 800 pounds. Wolves are 60 to 100 pounds. If something weighs 10 times more than you, you're not just going to go willy-nilly and attack them. So wolves test their prey, and if the prey looks like it's pretty healthy, they'll say, okay, go about your business. So they're only successful perhaps 10% of the time. There's many dynamics that impact both species, and you can see in the chart here, the black line are the wolves, count of wolves, and the orangey line is the moose. And if you're looking at that, you don't need to be a statistical genius to say those don't look like they have much of a relationship at all. And there is a little bit of a relationship, but not a huge amount, which indicates that they do have an impact on each other, but there's something else going on. And that's one of the things that, again, they find out that wolves aren't killing machines. They're not just going to wipe a species out. Let's see. In general, wolves and moose don't find a balance. A lot of people think there ought to be a perfect balance where there's always going to be 30 wolves and 850 moose, and it just holds there. That doesn't happen. There's a lot of dynamics they can identify, and then with hindsight, they can say this is probably why the numbers went up or down, but they're not good enough to be able to be predictive. Which gets to kind of this last major bullet point. Nature there's kind of a notion that is nature a machine like a clock, where you just crank a handle and you get the numbers coming out? Or is it something that's based upon historical contingencies? Or is it maybe a mix of both? And by historical contingencies, what we mean is that are there some big events that you can't predict that have a huge outsized impact on the numbers? And so I've listed 4 different things here that would fall under that historical contingencies. So in the 1980s, somebody came onto the island with a pet dog that had canine parvovirus, and it killed off a bunch of the wolves. So wolf count went from 50 down to 14 within 2 years. Canine parvovirus is basically, it's a death sentence. 1996, there was a big moose die-off, and you can see these on the charts. So that's where it went from 50 down to 14. In 96, that's the drop, and the moose numbers went down about 2,000. I'm glad I was not a volunteer that spring. There would have been a lot of meaty moose, and it used to be we would butcher the moose in total. Now we don't, because we have GPS. So if you find a meaty moose and you don't feel like butchering it, you GPS it, and somebody will come back a year from now or later in the year and get the bones. Back in the day without GPS, we butchered them. So if you found a full meaty moose, it would take longer than an hour. And usually somebody had gore under their fingernails or something. Let's see, another one that was a biggie is the old gray guy. He came over in 1996, 97, I think. It was a very short-lived ice bridge. He came across from the mainland and totally changed the genetic makeup of the island. And they didn't know what was going on. They could just tell that kill rates for the wolves was much more robust than it had been. And they knew old gray guy was odd because he was like the only wolf on the island that as he got older turned gray. Most of the wolves on the island at the time were black. But finally, when they got enough money in 2009 to do DNA analysis, it's like, oh, now we know what happened here. He came across from the mainland. So that's another one of those historical contingencies that change things. And then the last one I've got listed, sometime in the winter of 2012-13, the wolf numbers were already kind of hurting, and basically all of the important members of the pack went down into a mine shaft, and mine shafts on Isle Royale largely are just big rocky holes in the ground. They're not very graceful looking. You wouldn't want it to have been a miner on Isle Royale, but it probably had water in it and some ice. Ice broke with 3 of the wolves, a couple of females, or a couple of the alpha wolves and a female, and they died. And that kind of ended up being kind of the death knell. So that's when it started going down here. After that, there was really only one breeding female on the island. But those are all those historical contingencies that you can explain after the fact, but you can't predict them ahead of time. Click. Okay, so that's kind of the high level talk. Ken's going to pick it up in a minute, but not before I give you a commercial. again, going back to the Wolf Moose Foundation, we just started up a couple of years ago, and getting money from the federal government is getting increasingly difficult. As of March 31st, 2026, the project has no funding from the federal government. There's some grants that are in, grant proposals that are in. Somehow or another, right now, the federal government's not looking at those. So don't know if there's going to be any money coming or not. But the scientists in 2023 could see some of this coming and thought we're going to set up a nonprofit to start trying to raise some money. And the ideal goal would be to basically raise $2.2 million for an endowment. That would provide the project with a nice piece of money so that they could just kind of keep the principal over there on the side and do the project based upon the earnings. So it costs about $150,000 a year to support the project. And some years it's a little bit more, some years a tiny bit less, but usually it'll go higher, if anything. Anyway, so we've been in existence not quite 2 years. We've raised about $430,000 in the first 18 months. And if you'd like to help out, you can. I've got a tip jar over here for cash. Otherwise, the QR code will also take you over to the website. And if you want to, you can sign up. Please make your email address legible, and we'll get you emails and newsletters, etc. And I think that's it. It's your turn.
Right. You guys want to switch that out, give it to Ken?
Oh.
All right. So Jeff, when did you start doing Moose Watch?
I started doing Moose Watch in 2002.
So I started 20 years after he did. So he's got a little more experience. I've done 3 of them now. And I've become a volunteer for the organization in that I write articles for the newsletter. And primarily I do the science articles. But then again, I do a few other articles that are kind of fun or more fun than that. And this is going to be, I've got a couple articles here that I wrote. And if you do go to the website Jeff was talking about, there's a backlog or an archive, I should say, of the newsletters. The most current one is not out there, but you can read some of my work in the newsletters that are out there. So that's out there on the site too. So, so when I signed up, the image in my mind was kind of like the image in this picture of coming out here and finding a moose skeleton that's pretty much, this is after we gathered everything up and put it together, pretty clean, pretty ready to just pick up and fill out the kill card and giddy up. We've got a nice moose specimen to take back to the scientists. So that was what was originally kind of like what I was thinking it was going to be. And I found out that's not always the case. So this is going to be the story of Moose 5870, which we nicknamed the Floater. And with the numbers for the moose, every moose is assigned that we bring back any remains for. They get a number assigned to them, and that's, goes up over time. So that's over almost 6,000. We're closing in on that. But so that's how that got that number. This is May 23rd last year. And we were camped at Island Mine. That was actually on day 1. And man, that was a day of days. We got there the day before we were supposed to take the ferry, but there was bad weather and they canceled it that day and said, well, come back at 3:30 in the morning the next day. 3:30 in the morning? Are you kidding me? And take the ferry over. So we were on Isle Royale by 6 a.m. and we hiked out to Island Mine, set up, and then went for a walk in the woods, found 2 dead moose, did the kill cards on those, came back to camp. And that's when things took a turn. We were on team 2 as well, so May 23rd. So there'd already been 1 team of people out and about on the island before we were. So it kind of starts off like this. We saw one floating in a pond. And that's a backpacker I met at the Island Mine campground. And I had asked them because they had just hiked across the island from Rock Harbor all the way to Wendigo. And they saw moose floating in a pond. So that pond was between, so right here is where we were when we had the conversation, way over here at Island Mine. And right about there, 15 miles as the crow flies, is where that moose they had seen floating. Well, moose isn't going to float forever, am I right? So I got back to camp, and I made a note of that, and as time went by, then eventually we got back May 29th. I told Rolf about that, and that's Rolf right there with me. And he's got a notebook with him at all times, and he always writes with what? A pencil, right? Not a pen. Yeah, because he's learned that he's got a waterproof notepad that he writes on. And that's why he has a pencil, because if he writes in ink, it might run. So he's always writing with a pencil. So anyhow, so I told him about that. He wrote it all down and told that to the next team to go out. So you'll see right there, it says June 5. So about a week later, team 3 is out there. Who could make some observations about what they're seeing in this picture right here? Rain is correct. What else? You can't see the mosquitoes, but it's June, so you have to imply that there are mosquitoes, a lot of them in the picture. So it's raining right there. They've got their rain gear on. They're kind of probably cold. But right here, you've got a moose remains floating in the water. So, and this person had thrown this rope out there, and it has a grappling hook on the end of it. And they're trying to hook that moose right there to pull to the shore. So that's what's kind of going on this picture. It's cold, it's raining, it stinks, there's mosquitoes, and they're having a great time. So once they got it to shore, then you gotta, and it looks like the rain kind of picked up there and turned to fog as well. You've got a moose that's not quite ready for prime time. It's this is its head. You can see that's its mouth right there, its nose rather. So it's still kind of pretty gross. And this isn't even remotely close to the grossest picture that was in the pile that I chose. So you can thank me for that, because there were some really gross pictures. But what he's doing right there, I think that's Jim. He is cutting off the back leg because we need the leg. And then he's got the leg. See the hooves down at the bottom of the leg there? So he got that accomplished and was taking care of that. So this is team 2, or team 3. Team 2, my team, we found out about it. We passed that information on to team 3, and they went out and pulled the moose to the shore. So what do you do there? Who's had the experience of bear bagging before? Raise your hands. Okay. Who's hung a moose head in a tree before? Raise your hand. No, nobody? Okay, so that's what they're doing there. Same principles as bear bagging, hanging a moose up in the tree. Moose remains. And if you had walked past there between Todd Harbor and McCargo Cove in the summer of 2024, you probably got a whiff of that guy, because it was stinky from what I've heard. And this is an up-close picture of it, so you can make out the it's the snout, the mouth, the tongue hanging out still. This is the hooves back there hooked onto, they've got the leg hooked onto that. So this was, as Jeff mentioned, a moose that was too gross, too much meat on it to take back at this time. So they figured we'll leave it up in this tree for a few months. They didn't want to leave it on the ground because, yeah, it probably would have got cleaned up more, but it probably wouldn't have been there anymore either, because the wolves would have got me. Did what wolves do, chew on it. So anyhow, so this is the beginning of June, and up into the tree the moose went. So now we're in August, or no, this is actually July 30th. So what was noted about what was noted about the previous trip that group or team 3 did was it rained quite a bit on it. But for team 4, which is into the end of July and beginning of August, it was noted for how incredibly hot it was on the island. So this is the moose's head after they brought it down. So you can still see it's got a lot of moose jerky on it, a lot of meat, some fur, whatnot. So what they're doing right there is she's got the girl on the right has a knife in her hand, and they are scraping as much of the jerky off of it as they can. So it's kind of funny because, like I was saying, when I signed up for Moose Watch, remember that first picture? It was all kind of clean bones and everything. You end up doing some things that you never would have thought you would do, and you like, well, this might be gross, but I'll get through it. It'll be all right. And at least I didn't have to butcher one like Jeff has done in the past. He's told me some stories that I'm like, wow, that's crazy. So anyhow, this moose was brought back then, and Rolf Peterson figured out that what had caused the death of this moose was, remember the story about the winter that wasn't? Well, that moose was out on the ice and fell through the ice and drowned. Couldn't get out of the lake when it fell in, and that's how it died. And it remained floating until along came the moose watchers to bring the carcass back and take care of that. So that is the story of the floater. And I think I've got everything I wanted to talk about that. So Amy Goodwin, who was on the first team, or the team 2, who went team 3, she was on. So she was one of the people who helped pull the moose out of the pond. She wrote a thank you note to Rolf after the trip, and she said, "It rained, it smelled, it was cold and buggy, and by far one of the most incredible days of my life." So, yeah, it kind of takes a different kind of person to enjoy this kind of stuff, but I enjoy it. So kind of fun. All right, so this is a moose 5914, so you can see the numbers have increased here since the previous one. And this was one that my team found this year, and we were there on team 1 in May. So here we go. May 10th, we're on the Voyager 2. We're heading over there. By the way, who's been to Isle Royale here before? Raise your hands. Okay, that's pretty good showing. Who's been there in May? Anybody? Nobody? Oh, there's somebody. Okay. And what was your experience in May?
No bugs. A lot of wet trails. And, not a whole lot of people.
Was it cold?
Sometimes, it would be a high of 50s, sometimes it goes to mid-70s.
Okay, yeah. So you get the in Isle Royale in May, you can get a lot of different temperatures, that's for sure. So and when we arrived on the island, we had to cross patches of snow. So we had found out that it had been pretty cold in April and early May there on the island. But things warmed up quickly after we got there. So we did encounter snow here and there. We saw 5 moose total. I think we saw 3 on the very first day as we were walking from Wendigo to Feldman Lake. And for those who know the map a little bit, that would mean we hiked over here on this end of the island, the west end of the island, down to about there. So that was day 1, about 10 miles or so. But you can see this moose has had a lot of tick problems during the winter. So it's not good on the fur. But seeing three moose on day 1, you're thinking, it's going to be a breeze to find dead moose. Look at all the live moose we're running into. So we went hunting searching throughout the forests and the ponds and all over the swamps. Swamps are not as fun to search as open woods, but and we were finding things, but we weren't finding a lot of bones together. But we found some antlers, and they range in size from what Francis is holding on the right to what Matt is holding on the left. So, and those were right together. So kind of funny. That's me. I was searching high and low, looking for moose bones, and that's crossing a swamp right there. You can see the river a little bit to the edge there, or creek or whatever that is. To watch my step. All right, so now we're all the way to Wednesday, the 14th. And this is when things got interesting. So we started off at the Feldman Lake Campground, which is our camp for a little while. And we were going to go out to Cumberland Point and just hike along the trail, kind of come off, go through here and look for dead moose. So that's what we were doing on that day. So this is day 5 of the trip, but we have not found a complete skeleton yet, and we're getting kind of antsy about that. So then Amanda found a bone that had been quite chewed and quite old. It was obvious there wasn't going to be probably any other remains with it, but we took our packs off and did our due diligence, and we looked around and didn't find any bones associated with this lone bone that was just off to the side. But we did find these, and we had to figure out what were these. So these are the ear tags from, and a little piece of fur just fell off, darn it. So these are the tags that would have been on a moose's ear, or the moose ear. So as we're standing around there trying to figure out where this is, we kept getting a whiff. And once you get a whiff of a dead moose, you will remember that smell forever. And we're like, oh man, something not good. But it wasn't like consistent. It was just when the wind blew just right. So then Francis went out and just followed his nose literally like this and went and yelled, "Found it!" And we said, oh boy. So this is what he found right here. So that looks a little like a dinosaur there, but it's not. The legs were ripped off of it. The rumen pile was probably 20 to 30 yards away. I should be saying meters, sorry. Things like that. The one set of legs, they were probably 10 yards away or so. And the other legs, never found them. Wolves ran off with them. So we were looking at this guy and we're thinking, it really, really reeks. How long has this guy been dead? And we were thinking 48 hours most, maybe a few days. Further than that, couldn't be long because, man, it really, really stunk. And those are the legs right there. So we had to cut off. That's a hoof right there. So we had to cut off this portion to take that with us right there. So when Matt was cutting, and there he's scraping some of the meat off the skull, the blood was not congealed. So that was making us think, this is pretty fresh, okay? So if you cut into the thing and blood comes running out, very strange, okay? And that's what's making us think this is fairly new, but yet there was a lot of wolf poop around it. So, what gives here? Very strange. So, is it 6 months dead? Is it freshly dead? I don't know. I put that in there just for Jeff. Jeff and I love that movie, Young Frankenstein. So that was our debate. How freshly dead was it? So when I got back to Wendigo for the banquet and to turn in the bones from the other moose we found and whatnot, I told Rolf Peterson all about this and showed him the ear tags. And he said, well, okay. Seth Moore, who is with the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. He's the director of natural resources, and he was on the island, just happened to be there. So I showed him these tags, and he was able to, there's another tag over there that was from the other ear too. So he was able to provide some details about the bull yearling that eventually became Moose 5914. And this is not a picture of that exact moose. It's a different moose right here, but just that's showing what the GPS collar looks like. So on March 6th of this year, and it's still very much winter up there, and they only do the tagging and the collaring of them in the winter because they go by helicopter, and it's a heck of a lot easier to see a moose in the winter than it is when there's all the leaves and everything on the trees. So they darted the moose from the helicopter near Cumberland Point. And with that moose was its mother. So I don't know how much you know about moose, but when they're a calf all the way through year one, when they're called a yearling, they stick with their mother, and their mother protects them, kind of helps them to get food, and the wolf comes along, gets between them and the wolf, and says, go away, go away. And wolves are smart. Like Jeff said, maybe they end up killing 10% of the time. We don't know for sure. But when a wolf encounters a possible kick from a big animal like that, they back off. They say, okay, we're done. So anyhow, when they were collaring these 2 moose, it was determined that the mother that the yearling was with was pregnant. So what happens then is when the cow is about to give birth again, she tells the yearling, probably doesn't tell him, but somehow figures it out, you're no longer wanted. I've got babies coming on the way here. You go figure things out. So this is the time when things are rough for a moose. This is the roughest time of their life, between year 1 and 2. They're only about 300 to 400 pounds at that time, whereas like a full-grown bull moose be well over 1,000 pounds and very strong. And when they're healthy, wolves don't mess with them. Wolves go for the sick and the young. That's what they do: sick, young, and old. So anyhow, and April and May are when they are born. So what happened here was Seth told me that a mortality signal was sent out from this moose on April 22nd. And a mortality signal goes out when there's been no movement from the GPS collar for 6 hours. So they dispatched someone to find the collar, and that very day, and they found it. But there was no sign of the moose. So what happened to the moose? Is the moose on the loose? Who knows? But as they looked further at it, there was some wolf hair in the webbing of the collar. So pretty good chance there was a fight, right? But one of the things that sometimes happens is those collars they put on the bull moose, they leave them a little big because the moose grows so much and they don't want it to get strangled. So sometimes they slip out of their collars. But at this point, you're thinking, probably a wolf that did something. So when we had found it, then it was 235 meters from where the collar was found. So this starts to give us more focus as to what really happened. And the collar likely came off during a struggle with the wolves, and the moose ran a little bit further before it was finally taken down and killed there. So and so it was 22 days, yep. So why did it smell so ripe, though? Well, found out that Isle Royale had been very cold in the end of April and beginning of May. Like, it literally started warming up the day we came over there. So it's, in essence, this moose had been kept refrigerated for most of that time. And then we were on the island, and we got there on Saturday, and by Tuesday it was 84 degrees. So which was no good when I had a 15-degree sleeping bag, believe me. It was problematic for me. So that was why it stunk so bad, was all of a sudden they take it out of the refrigerator and throw it on the counter and leave it there and crank the heat up in the house, and whoo, got some stink. So that kind of solved our riddle as to what happened. And I would like to think that the wolf that came through our camp, and this is an actual picture that my teammate took, had something to do with that. So this was at Feldman Lake, so not far from where that wolf was, or that moose was found. So that's what I would like to think. And this was something that Jeff wrote right here. Even though Moose Watch teams go into the field each spring and summer specifically to support the Wolf Moose Project, sometimes we help out with other scientific efforts. This episode demonstrates how science can and should work together. The science isn't just one set of people investigating a phenomenon that other teams of scientists are also investigating, perhaps with a slightly different focus, but with overlap. The cooperation and communication, everyone benefits. So, and with that, questions? Anything? Question for me? Question for Jeff? Jeff.
Do people have to worry about all these ticks that hang out on the moose and get aspect of it is the humans have to worry about those ticks.
Not particularly, they're moose tick. They're not the red-legged deer tick that are down here. But I have taken a tick off of one of my teammates once.
Was it embedded or just kind of hanging out?
It had embedded itself into his chest, but he came out pretty nicely with some tweezers. And these are much bigger ticks, so when they're blood engorged, they're about as big as my thumb. So one time, one of the women in my group came up to me and said, "Look at this pretty stone."
Are you?
And I looked down and I could see some legs wiggling. And I mean, it was a big blood engorged, translucent tick. And I said, "That's a tick." So they get really big, but they're not as problematic to people as the ticks we have around here are. Yes.
From when you find the bones, they don't, not all moose die by the wolves. Can the scientists, can you tell if they died some other way?
Yes. So generally speaking, when they die by a wolf, the bones are going to be scattered all over the place, and chances are you're not going to find all of the bones. But when they die of starvation, they just kind of, lay down and they're dead. If a wolf comes along, they'll chew on it and whatnot. So not all the bones are there if they starve. But if they starve also, if it's fresh enough, you can break a bone open and look at the marrow. And if the marrow is got white on it, that's fat. And that usually means it didn't die of starvation because there's still some fat in the system. But if you break that bone open and you look and it's all red in there, there's no fat left. It's starved to death. So, and winters in a place like Isle Royale, you saw that picture of that moose that I had up there, and where was it? That moose is fairly thin right there. So they go through the winter and they're pretty much living off their fat reserves. And if winter is, say, spring is delayed by 2 weeks because it's a more severe winter, you're going to have a lot of moose that die off. Jeff showed that graph where 1996 there was a huge drop. It went from 2,500 moose on the island to about 500. So you had 2,000 of them die. That was a very severe winter, and that was what happened. And that's part of the problem with if there's too many moose on the island, they eat everything. And then when you've got that many moose and there's nothing left to eat and you get a rough winter, they're all going to die. That's basically, that's nature. That's how it is.
So most of the, just real quick, last thought, most of the moose are going to die either from wolf kill or starvation. Sometimes it'll be some other accident like falling into a mine shaft or drowning in a pond like a floater. But usually those sorts of accidents you can figure out. I found a couple of moose that have fallen off cliffs. So, yes, question over there?
I would think there'd also be disease would factor into it with the finding dead moose and everything, a lot of disease.
So generally, if there's going to be some disease that'll weaken them, and Ken already kind of alluded to this, the wolves are going to go after either the young, the old, or the sick. So the disease might be something that attracts the wolves, and the wolves know that this is a weakened moose. They test them. They think we can probably take this particular moose. So the proximate reason of death is a wolf kill, but underlying that, there might be some disease.
Yeah, they take out the vulnerable, which is how, both the healthy are left. And it's the complete opposite of what humans do.
Yep.
But that's my kind of commentary. But also, I wanted to know about the volunteers. You mentioned about you have teams of volunteers, and there's I think you mentioned that there's a way to. That sounds like something interesting. But I'd like to, I think you said 8, 9 days or something like that. You go out
8 days.
So generally, it's 7-8 days on the island, and the main thing you're going to try to do is hike off trail as much as you can. If you want to sign up, you go to the project's website, not the foundation's website. And usually in December, January, the dates get set for the year. And the dates get set, it takes that long largely because the boats don't set up their schedule for the coming year until late in the year. So as soon as the boats set their schedule, Moose Watch sets its schedule, and then we start taking applications. Last year, we got about 110, 120 applications, and 74 people, I think, was the number that I had up there. So quite a few people come out.
How many moose are on the island now, and how does that compare with before the reintroduction of wolves? I'm talking, this latest replenishment
Yep.
of the wolf population.
Somewhere around, they haven't been able to do the winter study the last 2 years. So it's a ballpark estimate of somewhere around 500 moose or so. And the last time they were able to check on the wolves were at about 30. So, and that, I'm guessing the wolf numbers have probably gone down, and possibly the moose numbers have gone down a little bit perhaps, and probably the wolves as well. When I was up there earlier this year in May, we went near a wolf den, and we found a somewhat recent kill, and that's where I got the smell of death on my gloves that I ended up throwing out because I could not get it off. But I had to break apart a leg, and so I was twisting it, trying to get the ligaments to come loose, and probably should have used a knife. That would have been the easier method. But and then we found a skull that we were going to come back and take care of. The neck, or we'd found a skull the day before, and we were going to come back. We were all tired, and we said, well, we'll come back tomorrow. And that skull was way in a different area than it was the day before. And then that autopsy that we had done, or necropsy, and when we were all done, I piled all the bones up into a kind of a big pile of bones, and we came back and they were scattered all over the place the very next day. So it was a very active den with wolves that were still coming around and chewing on things and eating things. So
Did that make you nervous knowing that there were these wolves like in your area, like the movies where they're all gonna suddenly encircle you guys and you're gonna be
No.
fighting for your lives?
no, but I was more nervous when we saw that wolf come through camp. I'll tell you that. I was, for a few minutes, I was losing my stuff. Well, not totally, but I was like, oh boy.
So question on the moose population in the irregular
Yep.
areas of that. 96, you have nearly 2,000.
There's about 2,500 moose,
2,500 moose.
and it dropped down to about 500.
And then in the last years, we had the decreasing wolf population total. It was only one breeding pair, and that intervention was required. Why did the moose population increase if there's only like 500 of them now?
So in terms of before the reintroduction of wolves in 2019, the moose population did go up into the low 2000s. And since the wolves have been on the island, the numbers have been coming down. And as Ken said, the winter study hasn't gone on, actually only missed 1 year. So right now they're extrapolating where they think the numbers are. They figured the moose numbers were going to continue to drop. They're thinking the wolf numbers were probably going to bump up a bit because there was a lot of breeding pairs on the island. So they're going to be very interested in doing winter study this year and getting some good counts. And then they can kind of put a dot in the middle and figure out what the count was probably last year.
I have one other question that goes on the same bill.
Okay.
The tapeworm. The tapeworm, I always had thought that when in the 70s, we were told that tapeworm and the moose, that was a relationship to the populations of both species.
Tapeworm?
Yeah.
Or are you thinking of the brain worm that the moose get?
No, I thought it was tapeworm.
I haven't heard of anything with the tapeworm, but
Oh, okay.
I'm not a
Maybe I
scientist, so
had
there
it
might be
wrong.
something
Maybe
going
I
on.
was young. I thought it was tapeworm. That there was tapeworm in the
They get a brain worm that
Okay.
deer also have. In
Okay.
deer, it just kind of gives them a fever. In moose, it's fatal.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's not really, it's sometimes found on the island, but not very often. And then
Two questions, one moose and one wolf.
Okay.
When I was up there a few years back, naturalist told me that they had the first recorded moose death. I don't know how they determined it, by hypothermia. Apparently the moose was so infested with the ticks that it rubbed the fur off and then went up to Lake Superior. Yeah. Has that become common or?
That exact scenario, I don't know. In terms of being totally covered with ticks, that's fairly frequent. The first year I went up, and it's in my book, one of the moose we found was totally covered with ticks. The group leader, we're all looking at it. This is before we were GPSing things, so we had to butcher it. And it was literally covered with ticks. The only thing we could see that was moose was the nose leather, and that's the only place that didn't have ticks on it. And they asked me to try estimating the number of ticks on the nose. So I held my hands up in what I thought was about a 6-inch by 6-inch, estimated the number of ticks, got that up to a square foot, and then thought how many square feet of surface is around a moose, and we had a little discussion on that. Anyway, the number ramped up to over 100,000. And that moose just probably died from anemia, because each of those ticks can, they don't take a lot of blood, but when you do it by 100,000, it probably got sucked dry. In terms of rubbing all their fur off, yes, they rub all their fur off. There's a nice little picture right there. That moose has still got fur, looks like basically from kind of his shoulders up onto his head and kind of his tail, but basically he was rubbing up against trees in the wintertime to get the ticks off. So moose are relatively new to North America. They've only been in North America about 10 to 12,000 years. Before they came over here, they hadn't encountered ticks before. So they're still kind of evolving to figure out what the heck are these tick things. So they're reactive groomers. So they're not going to start grooming and getting rid of ticks until they realize, oh my God, I've got a problem. Whereas deer are basically instinctive groomers. They just know that I just got to groom, kind of like cats. So deer don't really have a problem with ticks. Moose have a problem with ticks. And that moose had a problem with ticks, but made it to spring.
And my question about wolves, this year the first recorded wolf trying to get into a tent while a person was in it. I'm just wondering, have you heard any stories about how aggressive they're getting?
On Isle Royale, the new batch of wolves are definitely more frequently around campgrounds. They probably don't like hunting moose, especially if you're up at the Rock Harbor end of the island. I can smell the hamburgers at the grill. So I'm sure a wolf can smell it from a lot further away. So they are friendlier and more familiar than past wolves have been. In terms of, they're not a danger. So I think Jeff mentioned that, was Ken scared when he saw the wolf. They're not really a danger. Wolves really just want the food. They're not going to be going after humans.
I wasn't talking about going after humans.
Yep.
I'm just asking how aggressive they're getting at going after our food.
Aggressive enough where there are new rules for the Park Service on how we store food. They've got big wolf-proof containers, and if you're off trail, we're hanging the food. So
my group, the program is providing year sack bags, which are supposed to be grizzly bear proof, to the groups that go out. So my group, we were on the west end. This was the same as the this last one, and we hung the year sack from a tree, and it was we did a half-ass job. I'm gonna take full credit for that, full blame. And we only hung it up about this high because we were kind of in the belief that most of the problems were on the east end, not the west end. We came back that night after looking all over the place for moose bones, and the Ursack had claw marks on both sides of it. And we were debating, well, what caused that? What do you think this is claw marks? Was it too windy? Maybe it rubbed up against the tree. We were just kind of arguing back and forth. And then that wolf that I showed you the picture of walks through camp, and we went, Okay, well, that was what made the claw marks on the ursack, but it didn't get the ursack out of the tree. But you better believe we battened down the hatches after that. So we took, we hung stuff higher than the ceiling probably after that. And there was a food locker. They delivered food lockers out there, not food lockers, but I guess they call them bear lockers, whatever, for your food to put in. The problem being that I have a picture on my phone of them. They're painted dark brown. And like I was saying, it got up to say 82, 84 degrees while we were there. Well, we had put all our food in there, including, you got to bring chocolates, things like that. People brought cheeses. So I've got pictures of us then coming back, and it was probably 130 degrees inside that locker when it was sitting in the sun, brown metal. I mean, it was like a microwave going on all day long. So guy pulls this cheese out, it's in the package, and it is just like, completely separated, the liquid from the cheese part, and it's just gross. And then Laura's holding up her bag of chocolate and just looking at it. It's just a blob of a mess because everything melted. I mean, dehydrated food was fine. So we learned real quick that we'll put the dehydrated food, the oatmeal, whatever, stuff like that, in the food locker. But anything that could melt, that's going way up high in the tree. So you learn to adopt or to adapt.
I was going to ask you for the deer that you do find, the kills that you find. What is like the age distribution of those moose?
Found some we found females that are pregnant when they get killed. So you find that in utero moose to calves, although you don't generally find much of the calves because the bones are still not quite bones. So frequently, if a calf is killed, they'll eat everything, bones, fur, everything. So you don't find a lot of calves, but when you do, they're out there. I mean, that's one of the things that the wolves really like is to get a calf.
They don't put up much of a fight.
Yeah, they're not as big. They're just trying to get the heck out of town. So they're not as much of a danger to the wolves. But the wolves do eat most of them. So you don't find them very often, but you do find them. Most of them are going to either be starvation, which could be anywhere from the normal 1 to 2 years to 10, 12. And if it's a wolf kill, it's generally going to be somebody who's older or sicker. So it's going to be one of the older moose, probably. But most of the moose in the wild don't get much past about 12 to 14 years of age.
I will be writing an article about a moose or a pair of moose that were found last year. So Matt, who was holding the big antlers in the one picture I showed, his team found 2 bull moose that had been fighting and their antlers got locked and they died. So they brought back both of the skulls and whatnot, all the important bones, which can you imagine finding that and then having to haul all that back? So anyhow, they took the teeth and they ground them down to figure out how old the moose were. And the one was 7 years old and the other one though was 18 years old, which ties the record for the oldest bull moose ever known anywhere, not just on Isle Royale, but anywhere. So I'm going to write an article about that because I find this amazing that an 18-year-old moose, not only was still active and, it was battling with another moose for the right to mate with a cow. And that's why they butt heads and fight like that. And whoever backs down doesn't get to mate. So I think it's an amazing story. Wow. But so I'll be writing. So up to 18 years old. No, that was completely unrelated to that. And they just got to, there's a big backlog in the moose lab as to doing the work. And grinding the teeth down, there's only a few people who know how to really do it really well. So as far as figuring out the age, it takes literally years for some of them to be figured out. So like, what'd you say? There were 104 of them processed 2 years ago or whatever,
I
whatever it
don't know
was,
about the
something
back
like that.
I do know that Rolf really likes to be the one who,
I have something
Just
written
frequently
down
aging.
here.
I got a question. I recently, saw a mention about on Isle Royale, they found a dead wolf and they found wolf scat with wolf remains and fur on it.
Yep.
And I just wondered if you'd heard to validate that in speculation or,
I mean,
scientific, cause it sounded like, I didn't read the whole thing, but it just mentioned that it's very rare. I just wondered if you could extrapolate on that.
the
What would
implication
cause
being
that,
that
what their speculation, what would
a
bring that
wolf,
about?
that a wolf ate a wolf, is that?
Correct, that's
Yeah.
what they were speculating, based on several scats, that had
Um,
wolf fur in them, because it's very rare, was the implication for that to ever happen.
I don't know if it's rare, again,
Okay.
I'm not a scientist, but a couple of the wolves I have found with my groups on the island, the wolves were partially eaten by the other wolves.
Okay.
And in each of those instances, one of them I've got in my book, if you care to read it. A wolf was basically poaching a dead moose outside of his territory. And my supposition is that he got caught with his hand in the cookie jar, so to speak, and the other wolves didn't take kindly to it. So it happens, but that's not one of their prime food sources, no.
So when they brought the wolves over for the reintroduction in, was it 2017? 19. They brought them from 4 different locations. I know they brought some from the UP, some from Minnesota, Ontario, and then there's an island in Lake Superior, which is the second biggest island behind Isle Royale. I can never pronounce this either, and that's why I looked it up. It's
That's it?
Michipicone. Yes, thank you, Jeff. So anyhow, so basically moose from 4 different packs, and the thought was this is going to be great. There'll be genetic diversity, blah, blah, blah. Well, what happened was the stronger pack from Michipicoten Island killed all the other wolves. So, best intentions went awry, but those are the wolves that are left, or the descendants of them, I should say. And those wolves were used to killing caribou on an island that's unpopulated. So they're not used to humans whatsoever. They have no fear passed down through the generations, through the genes, whatever, of humans. So that's part of the problem. And they were much bigger than, I think they run up to 130 pounds, I think I heard, which is pretty big for a wolf. Yeah, so that's, I think part of the issue here is the wolves that are left never had any fear of humans, or at least for several generations, and it's just kind of, and so they're like, hey, a human, hey, that means food.
That raises that Michipicoten Island thing raises the question, is there a study on that island similar to what's happening on?
Well,
and the backstory of that is we met a guy a few times up in Unison, we call him Barefoot Carl, and he would tell us how we were talking about Isle Royale. He said, you got to go to Michipicoten. It's much better. It's a much better place to go. And they have the caribou. And now he said that they didn't have wolves, and that's how the caribou were surviving there.
Right. So that I looked that up pretty recently, actually. So there were caribou there, and then there was an ice bridge at some point in the last 20 years or whatever. Wolves came over, and the wolves were killing the caribou, and it was to the point where those caribou, and there's not many caribou in lower Ontario whatsoever now, so they realized the caribou were going to die off, so they removed them and the wolves, so now there's nothing on that island.
Yeah, because the caribou and the whitetail don't get along.
I think the caribou also died from the brain worm. So there's not a lot of, there's usually a little bit of overlap.
Thanks for the update on that.
You mentioned collecting scat in the winter. Is that only a winter thing? Because
Nope.
I think I saw quite a bit of wolf scat just on the trails.
Oh, yeah.
Because I
I'm
don't
sure
know
you
who
saw a
else
lot.
could have been leading it other than backpackers.
No, it's definitely wolf scat. The wolves use the trails. they collect a fair amount of it during winter. So in addition to the scientists on the west end of the island, there's usually a couple of research assistants on the east end. And it used to be the volunteers going out, we would come back with wolf scat. But probably 10 or 15 years ago, we quit doing it because they were basically doing a better job during the winter time. They got kind of one of their jobs. So we don't collect it during the summer, except this last year when they didn't do the winter study.
I was going to say, we collected some in May.
Would have been May because it wasn't a winter study. So this year the volunteers were collecting scat when we found it, if it was nice and fresh. But in years past, we used to collect it regularly. But yeah, you'll find it all over the trails, especially the boardwalks. I always like how you'll be on a boardwalk and in the exact middle of it. It's like
It's
they're leaving
crazy,
a-
isn't it?
Yeah, it's like they're leaving a little message for us. Yes, Lauren.
I just wanted to know if the scientists have done any studies on preventative measures to eliminate or somehow spray the moose for the ticks.
No, that's not what the scientists are there for. The scientists are there just basically to watch and see what the heck goes on. So they're not trying to solve any particular problems. They're just trying to kind of figure out what are some of the dynamics that go into the various population shifts and probably take a big tick collar or something, but no, they're not trying to do it.
Do the ticks die off in the winter, or are they just hibernating?
If it's cold enough, it will kill off a big chunk of them. So this is another problem with climate change. There's no ice bridge for the wolves to get over there, and it doesn't get cold enough to kill the ticks. And that's the same reason we have such a tick explosion in southeast Michigan, whereas 10 years ago, there were really no ticks here. Now you go to Kensington Metro Park, as I did Sunday, and one of my friends had a tick embedded in him. Or not embedded, but crawling around on him. That was Jens.
They are also called winter ticks, are they not? The moose ticks and winter ticks, that's the same parasite, right?
Don't think I've ever heard it called winter tick. In terms of, all I know is really cold winter will kill them off. They also like humid summers. Outside of that, my knowledge of ticks is sort of limited. I butchered a moose covered in ticks, but, and I know I don't like them on me.
They are creepy.
Yeah, kind of creepy. Did you have a question?
My question was similar to hers, is whether or not the ticks were that hardy that they would survive the winter.
You mentioned your federal funding just completely dried up. I'm guessing that's around maybe 9, 10 months ago.
It's in danger. It hasn't dried up necessarily, but they do think it's going to be more difficult to come by. They've been getting grants for, I forget the exact name of the program, but it's a National Science Foundation program that's aimed specifically at long-term scientific research. And there's been talk that they've been hearing for several years that they're going to start either eliminating the funding or reducing the funding for that. So that's why they started the foundation. There's a grant proposal into that exact same grant pile of grant money, but they're not going to get word on that until early part of the year with the government shutdown, might be longer. So funding after March 31st is a question mark.
Do you get any state funding at all?
The project doesn't really get any state funding. The two biggest funders are the National Science Foundation and the National Park Service. The Park Service money they'll probably get, but again, it's another one that they have to wait every single year. The National Science Foundation one's always come in 5-year chunks.
Do we have to be out of here at a certain time?
Wrapping it up because we have to pack up and be out by 9.
Okay.
So, do you have any last things you wanted to say?
If you'd like to sign up to get newsletters, emails from the foundation, please do. Make sure your email address is legible. I also have the tip jar there. And I did write a book on exactly what Ken and I have been doing. It's published by Michigan State University Press. I brought copies if you'd like. I can take cash, check, or a credit card. Otherwise,